Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Back on the battlefield in the Wildlands, the Grand Heaven Master and the other powerful experts stood there with very serious expressions on their faces. Bai Xiaochun's mind was still reeling from the sight of that huge vine. However, the northern part of the Great Wall was too far away, so he hadn't been able to see how the vine defeated the Celestial. However, the Celestial's enraged voice had echoed out to fill the Wildlands, and therefore, everyone back on the battlefield had gasped and looked over at the Gravekeeper. Bai Xiaochun had known before that the Gravekeeper was powerful, but to see it with his own eyes was a different thing. Now, he truly knew that the Gravekeeper's battle prowess was at an unimaginable level. That girl joined forces with the Celestial, but in the end, they were both injured and forced to flee. Suddenly, Bai Xiaochun swallowed hard. He wished he could run over and grab onto the Gravekeeper's leg. After all, his identity had been revealed to everyone. After thinking about everything he had done in the Wildlands, his heart began to pound with anxiety. His actions as Bai Hao had caused countless people to hate him, and now that they knew he was the notorious fugitive Bai Xiaochun, there would be no shortage of people who wanted to kill him even more than before. In fact, if they lined up and took turns, it would probably take over 100 years to get through them all. The only person who can save me is Great-Grandpa Gravekeeper. I have to think of a way to get him to pay attention to me. Muttering to himself, he took advantage of the fact that nobody was paying attention to him to start inching toward the Gravekeeper. Everyone else was still stunned from the shocking battle they had just witnessed. As for the Gravekeeper, he sighed and declined to pursue the Celestial. It wasn't that he didn't want to, he simply couldn't. If possible, he wished to avoid that level of conflict with the Celestial right now. The truth was that he actually didn't have very much time left. He had been very reluctant to use that divine ability of his which inflicted eternal injuries onto the world itself. There were now 5 gaping wounds up in the sky, and on the ground, there was a huge mountain, a river of blood, a golden cauldron, and a sun. All of them were eternal objects. And of course, the Gravekeeper knew that it was just as the Celestial had said, he couldn't use that divine ability again. The 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, earth, which were closely connected to the 5 yin organs, were unique, but were also classified as a trump card even for the Gravekeeper. What a pity that I only managed to hit that Bloodhair, he murmured to himself, and didn't manage to kill him completely. He looked much older than he had earlier, and his aura was clearly fading away in a way that could not be replenished. The Celestial had laid a trap for him, and he had turned that trap around into a deadly ambush. But in the end, neither of them had completely succeeded in their aims. The fact that the little girl had escaped wasn't very important to him, and in fact, he had let her go. He knew exactly where she came from, and it was actually a safety precaution to refrain from killing her. Besides, he had another goal in mind, and knew that he could get her to unwittingly help him. The main thing he cared about was the Celestial. Even as the Gravekeeper sighed and contemplated these things, the cold voice of a woman suddenly echoed out, breaking the silence. You think you can get away, Bai Xiaochun? It was none other than Mistress Red Dust, who had finally awoken from her reverie. When she looked over and saw Bai Xiaochun slinking away from her, she thought back to their encounter back in the labyrinth, and immediately grew angry. Her shout caused everyone else to come to their senses, and all of them turned to look over at Mistress Red Dust and Bai Xiaochun. A strange expression could be seen on the giant Ghost King's face. A glimmer passed through the Grand Heaven Master's eyes, and he looked over at the Gravekeeper. As for the War Champion King and the 9 Serenities King, they both wore frowns on their faces. The only person who was smiling was the Spirit Advent King, and it seemed like a genuine, jovial smile. Chen Haosong and the other Heavenly Dukes had unsightly expressions on their faces. Back during the shocking battle which had just played out, they had not been able to spare any attention for Bai Xiaochun. But now that the fighting was over, they thought back to how he had been using the name Bai Hao, and how he had wreaked bloody havoc all through the Wildlands. That caused gleams of ill intent to appear in their eyes. Terror gripped Bai Xiaochun's heart, and his expression flickered. Rushing backward a few paces, he cried out loudly, "Everybody calm down. I can explain." The demigods didn't move, nor did the Heavenly Dukes. However, the rage on Mistress Red Dust's face couldn't have been more dramatic. When she thought back to what he had done to her in the labyrinth, and how he was now her fiancé, it made her so angry that she couldn't hold back from racing directly toward him. "You owe me an explanation, Bai Xiaochun," she screamed. "Zemo, I saved your life. I'm your greatest benefactor." Anxiety mounting by the moment, he backed up even faster. Turning to the giant ghost king, he shouted, "Father-in-law, save me." His words caused even more strange expressions to appear on the faces of the demigods. The giant ghost king cleared his throat in embarrassment and pretended he hadn't heard. However, Mistress Red Dust's rage increased. "Shut up," she shot back, accelerating as she headed toward Bai Xiaochun. Racked with nervousness, Bai Xiaochun turned and started running in the direction of the gravekeeper. "Master, save me." When he said the word master, the Grand Heaven Master gasped, and the giant ghost king's jaw dropped. The expressions of the Nine Serenities King, War Champion King, and Spirit Advent King all flickered, and the hearts of Chen Haosong and the Heavenly Dukes began to pound. Even Mistress Red Dust was caught off guard, and lurched to a stop. Eyes wide, she watched Bai Xiaochun hurry over to the gravekeeper and then offer him formal greetings the way an apprentice would to a master. The gravekeeper wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. He looked at Bai Xiaochun staring at him in melodramatic fashion, and couldn't help but shake his head. Waving his sleeve, he declined to say anything, and simply vanished, taking Bai Xiaochun along with him. The Grand Heaven Master and everyone else stared at the spot the gravekeeper had just disappeared from, their hearts shaking with shock. The fact that Bai Xiaochun had used the word master left them deeply and profoundly shocked. Chen Haosong suddenly felt profoundly nervous, and dispelled any thoughts of causing problems for Bai Xiaochun in the future. Although the gravekeeper hadn't admitted the truth with words, the fact that he had taken Bai Xiaochun away with him explained everything. Of course, the Grand Heaven Master had long since come to the realization that the gravekeeper had taken an interest in Bai Xiaochun. After a short moment of silence, he transmitted messages to the four heavenly kings. Out of respect for the Hell Emperor, they all agreed to keep the matter of Bai Xiaochun's identity a secret. The only news which would be allowed to spread was that the little girl had been impersonating Bai Xiaochun. His true identity would not be revealed. After making the agreement formal, everyone departed. The battle which had just been fought had been too sudden and too important. Troops needed to be deployed. After all, the fact that the Great Wall had fallen meant that big changes were coming. The last to leave were the Giant Ghost King and Mistress Red Dust. Mixed emotions could be seen on the Giant Ghost King's face as he turned to his stunned daughter. He sighed, "Moer, I didn't think things through carefully enough. About the marriage agreement, let's just cancel it, alright?" Mistress Red Dust stood there quietly, looking off into space. She didn't say anything. Her mind was filled with an image of Bai Xiaochun pulling her to safety in a moment of deadly crisis. Instead of just fleeing on his own, he had taken it upon himself to protect her. Eventually, everyone was gone, and silence filled the lands. However, the 5 wounds in the sky were still there, and the vast gulches which had been hewn in the lands during the course of the fighting remained. The evidence of the world-shaking battle was still there. Back in the Underworld River restricted area, 2 figures stepped out of thin air onto the bank of the river. They were none other than the gravekeeper and Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was feeling as nervous as ever. He knew that the matter of his identity had been declared a secret, and at the moment, he was clasping hands in formal and very polite fashion to the gravekeeper. "Great-grandpa gravekeeper. It's not that I wanted to trick everyone. You understand, right, sir? I, Bai Xiaochun, am a very kind-hearted person. I don't like causing problems. I'm very well behaved. I just want to get back to the river-defying sect. They're the ones who all want to kill me. I disguised myself to try to be able to get home safely." Proclamation of Universal Grace? Inspections Commissioner? Shakedowns? I never meant to do any of those things. Sometimes in life, you just have to make some compromises. As he spoke, he kept his eye on the gravekeeper to try to assess his attitude. However, the more he went along, the more he really felt like he had the short end of the stick. He had just been going with the flow, which ended up forcing him to do a lot of things he didn't really want to do. No expression could be seen on the gravekeeper's face as he listened to Bai Xiaochun. Finally, he waved his hand, summoning a black command medallion that he tossed toward Bai Xiaochun. The Celestial used heaven-span seawater to create a barrier where the 4 sections of the Great Wall once stood. No one will be able to get through that barrier anytime soon. I am unable to leave the wildlands, so I can't escort you home. If you really want to get back to the river-defying sect, you'll need to go through the Deadmire. And the only way you'll get through it safely is with this command medallion. Surprised, Bai Xiaochun accepted the command medallion. As soon as it touched his skin, intense coldness rushed into him. Clearly, it was some sort of precious object. Bai Xiaochun had heard of the Deadmire before. There were even some people who called it the Emptymire, as it was a location between the Heavenspan region and the wildlands that was completely empty of all life. There were only 4 areas where the Deadmire was accessible, all of which were near the Great Wall. With the command medallion he now possessed, he could enter it, and thus leave the wildlands. Furthermore, it would actually speed up his journey back to the river-defying sect. After all, his original plan had been to cross the Great Wall, which would have eventually required that he travel back to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect by boat. The fact that the Gravekeeper was treating him so well was moving. Obviously, the command medallion was no fake. If the Gravekeeper wanted to get rid of him, he wouldn't have needed to resort to some trap to do it. Great-grandpa, you really are like my own great-grandfather. Well, I guess I'll take my leave now. With that, he prepared to leave. After all, the Wildlands was a dangerous place, and considering that everyone was currently a bit stunned by who Bai Xiaochun's master was, it seemed like the perfect time to get away. Of course, the Celestial's attitude gave him pause. But considering that he was a very unimportant person in the grand scheme of things, it seemed unlikely that important people like the Celestial would pay much attention to him. Besides, he hadn't done anything to offend the Celestial directly. If I just slip back quietly, it should be fine. Although he felt a bit hesitant, now that his identity had been revealed, the Wildlands was definitely much more dangerous than the river-defying sect. However, just as he made his decision, the Gravekeeper suddenly started talking again. He stood there on the bank of the underworld river, his hands clasped behind his back as he said, "Do you remember how I answered you all those years ago when you asked for my name, huh?" Bai Xiaochun said, stopping in place and looking back. This world is basically a huge tomb, buried within which is a sovereign known as the Archlord. I am he who watches over his grave. The Gravekeeper. For some reason, the Gravekeeper looked older than ever as he spoke. Upon that sovereign's death, he closed the world gate and left instructions that only someone who cultivated his legacy all the way to the Mahayana realm, a celestial, could open that gate. Until then, no one is permitted to leave this world. He spoke softly, an ancient gleam in his eyes as though he were contemplating the past. A tomb? Bai Xiaochun said with a soft gasp. Although he had learned a bit about the world in scattered bits throughout the years, this was his first time getting such a detailed explanation. The fact that the world he lived in was actually a tomb caused his eyes to widen and his heart to race. His descendants became the Imperial clan, the Gravekeeper continued. And that is the origin of the Arch-Emperors, and also why this world's true name is the Arch-Emperor realm. The Gravekeeper wasn't looking at Bai Xiaochun, which made it seem like he was talking to himself as he contemplated ancient times. Were it not for certain unexpected events, this world should have long since seen an emperor who rose from the demigod realm to the Mahayana realm. Unfortunately, unexpected events did occur. A cultivator with spectacular talent created a new technique, a type of celestial magic. He forged his own path of cultivation, and eventually toppled the Arch-Emperor dynasty. Although the Gravekeeper was speaking very quietly at this point, Bai Xiaochun could tell that there was a touch of praise in his voice when he mentioned this certain cultivator. Obviously, that cultivator was so spectacular that he was deserving of praise by the Gravekeeper. Furthermore, Bai Xiaochun knew exactly who he was. I was unable to interfere with the matter. In fact, there are many things that I can't interfere with. I'm just a Gravekeeper after all. I watch over the Sovereign's tomb, I tend to the cycle of reincarnation, and I defend the World Gate. The first time I took any action at all was to ensure that the Imperial clan wasn't exterminated, and that the Joss flame of the world continued to burn here in the Wildlands. However, the price I paid for interfering was that my time of existence was cut in half. That cultivator I mentioned spent years trying to find me. When he did, he asked me to open the World Gate. He was illegitimate, so naturally I refused, but I did tell him the proper method to achieve his goal. However, the Archlord's legacy was not suitable for him. He came to me over and over again, and tried many ways to convince me. But in the end, he finally came to the conclusion that the only way to leave this place would be to kill me. Presumably, you know who that cultivator is. He is Taoist Heavenspan, also known as the Celestial. At this point, the Gravekeeper turned and looked at Bai Xiaochun. The Gravekeeper's words already had Bai Xiaochun reeling in astonishment, and yet, that astonishment grew more intense when Bai Xiaochun saw the Gravekeeper's face. Great-grandpa, you. The Gravekeeper seemed even older than before, so much so that he looked like he had just climbed out of a grave. He was very different from before, and fairly radiated a sense of weakness. I'm very old. I've been around for far too long. I suspect that when that sovereign created me, he didn't expect for me to exist for this much time. My original fate was to perish along with the opening of the World Gate. It seemed as if the Gravekeeper didn't mind the fact that he was growing extremely old at all. I don't have much time left, so I decided to take action earlier. Unfortunately, not even calling upon forbidden magic was I able to kill him. Acting in the way I did reduced my time even further. In addition, the wounds caused by the forbidden magic have pushed the world closer to the brink of collapse. The gravekeeper shook his head, regret shining in his eyes. As of this point, Bai Xiaochun felt like he understood everything. The gravekeeper was not just regretful for having failed in killing the celestial in the recent battle. He regretted not having done so earlier. Because of the various limitations he faced, he had allowed the celestial to keep living and grow into what he was today. In fact, he had taken action today in the hopes of making up for some of those past mistakes. I knew from the beginning that I might fail to kill him. But I decided to try anyway. The truth was that, even before you came to the wildlands, I had already begun to make arrangements for what happens after I die. The gravekeeper sighed and looked over at Bai Xiaochun. The successor of the Hell Emperor? Bai Xiaochun asked hesitantly, his heart beginning to pound. The gravekeeper nodded, causing Bai Xiaochun's heart rate to increase even more. As far as Bai Xiaochun was concerned, if he hadn't been able to put the puzzle pieces together, it would have meant he was a complete idiot. After all, it seemed obvious that the gravekeeper had noticed how outstanding he was, and that he wanted him to accept his legacy and become the next Hell Emperor. The mere thought of becoming the Hell Emperor got Bai Xiaochun profoundly excited. However, he cleared his throat and humbly said, Great-grandpa, the truth is that I'm not really that outstanding. However, I can say that I'm ready. Right. What does the successor of the Hell Emperor actually have to do? The gravekeeper looked deeply into Bai Xiaochun's eyes and said, he will enter the underworld river, and deliver his soul to the underworld palace. He will guard the sovereign's tomb and watch over the cycle of reincarnation. He will defend the world gate and refuse to open it for anyone who is illegitimate. Bai Xiaochun was a bit taken aback. The last part of what the gravekeeper had just said seemed interesting, but there was something a bit unsettling about the first part. Great-grandpa, what do you mean by, deliver his soul to the underworld palace? If his soul goes into the underworld river, doesn't that mean that he has to die? When he saw the gravekeeper nod in response, he gasped, and his face turned as white as a sheet. Great-grandpa, look, I'm really not very outstanding. I'm just a regular person. I get restless easily, and have a lot of faults. If I'm in charge of the underworld river, bad things will probably happen. It's too big of a responsibility for a kid like me. Why don't you pick someone else? I'll see you later, great-grandpa. He took a step back, but before he could do anything more, the gravekeeper's hand shot out toward him as if to grab him. Bai Xiaochun let out a yelp. I'm really not the best choice, great-grandpa. Wherever I go, I accidentally cause huge disasters. I don't want to cause a disaster for you. Pipe down. I'm not so much of an idiot that I would pick you to be my successor. As it turned out, what the gravekeeper had grabbed was not Bai Xiaochun, but his bag of holding. All of a sudden, Bai Hao's soul-hoarding pagoda flew out into the open and came to rest on the gravekeeper's palm. The person I've picked to be my successor isn't you, he said coolly, it's Bai Hao. Huh? Bai Xiaochun replied, visibly stunned. Bai Xiaochun wasn't the only one to be stunned. Bai Hao sat there inside his soul-hoarding pagoda, his jaw hanging open and his mind spinning. The sudden dramatic turn of events was almost too much to take. During the dramatic battle, Bai Hao hadn't dared to come out into the open. Upon returning to the underworld river, he had cautiously peered out into the world, listening to the gravekeeper and even feeling excited that his master was about to become the Hell Emperor. Never could he have imagined that the gravekeeper would suddenly grab him, and then say that he was the one who was supposed to be the successor. Worried that Bai Xiaochun might misunderstand the situation, he anxiously said, Senior, sir, you must have made a mistake. Off to the side, Bai Xiaochun looked on, stunned. Actually, he wasn't displeased at all. In fact, there was only one thing he was thinking. My apprentice is going to be the next Hell Emperor? Heavens, is this really happening? If my apprentice becomes the next Hell Emperor, then nobody in the wildlands will ever dare to provoke me. He was feeling very excited about the whole thing. Obviously, nobody would ever dare to cause problems for him from now on. If they did, he could have his apprentice wave his hand and crush them. He was essentially going to become invincible. 9 Serenity's King? Grand Heaven Master? Chen Haosong? Who will dare to provoke me? Who will dare to glare at me? Profoundly pleased, he slapped his thigh, threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Wonderful, he said loudly. You have made an excellent choice, great-grandpa. This apprentice of mine is the perfect fit to be the Hell Emperor. In fact, nobody in all the wildlands is more suitable. Seeing that Bai Hao was about to jump in and say something, Bai Xiaochun waved his hand dismissively in the way that a master should. As your master, Bai Hao, I will represent you to accept the offer. It's set. A profound gleam could be seen in the gravekeeper's eyes as he looked at Bai Xiaochun and then Bai Hao. No one would ever have been able to guess the gravekeeper's plan ahead of time. The truth was that he had never considered Bai Xiaochun as a possible successor. Furthermore, Bai Hao was only one of several that he had been watching. For example, there was Zhou Yixing, and the soul of the Luokan clan chosen that Bai Xiaochun had killed. And there were others. He had many candidates, including the people on the Hell Emperor stele. However, the reason that Bai Hao had risen up from among all those candidates to become the official successor had less to do with the gravekeeper and more to do with Bai Xiaochun. The truth was that Bai Xiaochun was more important to the gravekeeper than any of the other people on the list of candidates. Naturally, the gravekeeper didn't want him to become the Hell Emperor. He had a more important mission in mind for Bai Xiaochun. It was for this reason that Bai Xiaochun happened to encounter Bai Hao when he was teleported into the wildlands. Back then, when Bai Xiaochun had made his departure, the gravekeeper had appeared, with a very profound look in his eyes. It was also for this reason that Bai Xiaochun ended up encountering Bai Hao's soul in the necromancer kettle. The gravekeeper wanted Bai Hao and Bai Xiaochun to meet, and to make that happen, he had interfered behind the scenes several times. Although Bai Xiaochun had been suspicious about certain things over the years, the clues had been too vague for him to come to any conclusions. Of course, not even the gravekeeper could have anticipated that Bai Xiaochun and Bai Hao would become apprentice and master, would accomplish so many things, and would develop such deep feelings for each other. All the gravekeeper had done was ensure that they met. And if Bai Hao could gain Bai Xiaochun's approval, well then, he would become the chosen successor. If he was unable to do that, then the gravekeeper wouldn't have hesitated to discard him and pick another candidate. He would have then ensured that the next candidate encountered Bai Xiaochun and got to know him. And he would have continued to do that until he found a successor that Bai Xiaochun approved of. In fact, as far as he was concerned, Bai Xiaochun's approval was the only main requirement to become his successor. Of course, he didn't explain that to Bai Xiaochun. After looking closely at Bai Hao and Bai Xiaochun, he turned his attention to Bai Hao, to whom he spoke in a voice that seemed to echo out from ancient times. Bai Hao, are you willing to become my successor? Looking very nervous, Bai Hao looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Master, Bai Xiaochun was worried that the opportunity might pass. Besides, he really did feel that this was a wonderful thing for Bai Hao. Hurry up and agree, my little apprentice, he said. This is good fortune for you. Bai Hao hesitated for a moment, mixed emotions in his eyes as he looked at his master. The truth was that he didn't care too much about the supposed position of being the successor to the Hell Emperor. What he was more worried about was losing out on the happiness he felt by being able to accompany his master. His master was his only family, and the only person he truly liked. That relationship was the most important thing in his entire life. However, he also realized that his master had offended too many people in the wildlands. By becoming the Hell Emperor, he could make sure that no one ever dared to cause problems for his master. Having reached the conclusion that this was definitely the best way of looking at the matter, he gritted his teeth and looked back at the gravekeeper. Senior, I am willing to become your successor. However, sir, I can't view you as my master. For all eternity, I will only ever have one master. Both his voice and his eyes brimmed with determination. He was willing to become the next Hell Emperor so that he could protect his master, but that didn't mean that he could change his allegiances. Bai Xiaochun was shocked to hear Bai Hao's words, and his gaze turned even softer as he looked at his apprentice. However, he knew his apprentice well, and understood how importantly Bai Hao viewed their master-apprentice relationship. Although no expression could be seen on the gravekeeper's face, he was smiling inside. The truth was that despite what he knew about Bai Hao, he still wasn't absolutely convinced that he was the perfect person to be the next Hell Emperor. After all, it was a very important position. As such, he was still performing a few tests. However, Bai Hao's answer conformed perfectly with what the gravekeeper was looking for. There were no false feelings in them, and they caused the gravekeeper to be even more satisfied. Good, the gravekeeper said, nodding. Although Bai Hao had a lot of questions, the gravekeeper didn't give him an opportunity to ask them. He waved his hand, causing a streak of red light to fly out toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened as he reflexively reached out to catch a lock of blood-colored hair. As soon as it was out in the open, intense rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth. The sky dimmed, and a whirlwind sprang up around Bai Xiaochun. It almost seemed like the hair was trying to escape his grasp, prompting him to quickly clasp his hand down to hold it. As he did, he was certain that he could sense something howling, and even detected a dramatic thrum of life force from inside of it. The gravekeeper's eyes sparkled. He waved his sleeve, and the howling ceased. An invisible seal had been placed on the lock of hair, making it impossible for it to flee, not even if it had more life force than it already did. All it could do was lay there meekly on Bai Xiaochun's palm. A mere brush with the life force inside the hair caused Bai Xiaochun's entire body to thrum. Of course, he recognized this hair. It was the very same blood hair which he had seen on the celestial. The life force in that hair should push your undying bones to the peak. Think of it as a gift of good fortune from me to you. The gravekeeper then took Bai Hao with him as he stepped toward the underworld river. The water surged as they entered, and then they floated off into the distance until they were gone. The underworld river slowly faded away, revealing the dry riverbed. Everything in the area was completely quiet. Bai Xiaochun was alone on the dry riverbank, holding the blood-red hair, looking off in the direction his apprentice had just vanished in. Everything had happened so quickly. Although Bai Xiaochun wasn't interested in becoming the Hell Emperor, he did hope that his apprentice would succeed at it. However, to have Bai Hao gone so suddenly had him feeling a bit lonely and disappointed. When the baby eagles grow up, they have to leave the nest eventually, and soar in the sky. He sighed, reminding himself that at least he had become someone very important because of everything that had happened. There's nobody more powerful than me in the wildlands now. My Taoist partner is a diva, my father is a demigod, and my apprentice is the Hell Emperor. Not even the Grand Heaven Master could match up to me. When he thought about it in this way, his heart began to race with excitement. Happy for his apprentice, and excited about his new status, he looked down at the hair he held, and his heart yet again began to thump. A lock of the Celestial's hair. It was the only red hair on his head. I can only imagine how important a treasured item like this would be to the Celestial. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun glanced around subconsciously. The cultivators that had previously been stationed here to guard the underworld river restricted area were nowhere to be seen, leaving him completely alone. Perhaps it was the doing of the gravekeeper, or perhaps they left because of the shocking battle and the destruction of the Great Wall. The entire structure of the wildlands would be changing. At this point, he gritted his teeth. Fudge, what the hell am I afraid of? Great-grandpa Gravekeeper gave this to me. It's mine now. Besides, according to what Great-grandpa Gravekeeper said, if I absorb this life force, my undying bones will climb to the very peak. Even if this hair belonged to someone more powerful, I would still absorb it. After the tempering he had experienced in the wildlands, Bai Xiaochun had become somewhat more courageous than he had been in the past. Therefore, he found an area in the underworld river restricted area that was suitable to hew out a temporary immortal's cave, and then went into seclusion to cultivate. Somewhere else in the wildlands, in what seemed like a different dimension, there was a huge black river that was none other than the underworld river. It was as black as night, and yet, it was still possible to see a huge palace at the very end of the swirling river water. The palace was also black, and very sinister in appearance as it rose up over the river water. There was something consummately powerful about it, and there was a constant stream of souls which flew toward it, encircled it, and then vanished on their way to being reincarnated. This was none other than the Hell Emperor Palace. This place controlled reincarnation, and determined matters of life and death. In one of the grand halls in that palace, 2 rows of statues could be seen lining the walls, that looked like underworld generals. At the very end of the hall, beyond the statues, was a huge throne made of black bones. Suddenly, the gravekeeper appeared, walking through the hall until he was at the throne, upon which he sat down. He was surrounded by a domineering aura, making him seem like a paragon or a god. He wore an imperial crown, as well as a black robe embroidered with an underworld dragon. With the wave of a sleeve, he caused Bai Hao to materialize right in front of him. He was clearly ill at ease. He looked around at the awe-inspiring hall with its profound aura of death, and then turned to look at the gravekeeper, who sat there on his throne, face completely expressionless. Bai Hao quickly bowed his head and clasped hands in greeting. Bai Hao, the gravekeeper said, his eyes shining brightly, and his voice echoing like heavenly thunder. The gravekeeper seemed very different than he had when talking with Bai Xiaochun earlier. Right now, he absolutely seemed like the mighty Hell Emperor. Bai Hao could tell that, and a very serious expression overtook his face. Listen well, Bai Hao, the gravekeeper continued, his voice thrumming with mysterious power that pierced into his soul body and resonated with his very soul. Because of this, the gravekeeper would be able to see the tiniest fluctuations in Bai Hao's soul, and would know instantly whether or not he was lying or telling the truth. Bai Xiaochun is currently your master, and will be in the future. Although I took it upon myself to change your fate, all I did was place you at Bai Xiaochun's side. He was the one who took you as an apprentice, it was not my arrangement. It was simply your destiny. Furthermore, the reason you have become my successor is not because I approve of you, but rather, because your master Bai Xiaochun approves of you. Remember well, your mission is not to guard the underworld river, nor is it to look over reincarnation. Instead, you are to help your master in caring for the underworld river. You are to defend your master. And if you ever betray him, the underworld river itself will ensure that you are killed in body and soul. As he spoke, the gravekeeper's voice grew louder and louder until it was a crashing boom that caused everything to shake violently, and even caused the water of the underworld river to vibrate. Countless souls began to tremble and shake, and then offer obeisance to the underworld palace. Bai Hao was shaken, but it was without the slightest hesitation that he said, "The word betray doesn't exist for Bai Hao." His words were spoken with the utmost solemnity and honesty. In his world, nothing was more important than his master Bai Xiaochun, who was his only family. In fact, he wasn't offended or worried at all by what the gravekeeper had said. In fact, it conformed perfectly with how he felt. And his answer could not have been more forthright. A flicker of praise passed through the gravekeeper's eyes. This had been his final test of the Bai Hao. The position of Hell Emperor was too important, and he had to ensure that he didn't make any mistakes. As of this point, he was convinced that Bai Xiaochun had made the right choice. Next month, you will be the Hell Emperor. With that, he waved his finger at Bai Hao, sending his legacy and his divine abilities into him. Furthermore, outside of the underworld palace, countless magical symbols could be seen, flickering brightly until they transformed into a huge vortex. The spinning of that vortex indicated that the passing of the legacy had begun. As the Hell Emperor's legacy began to be passed on, Bai Xiaochun was in his immortals cave in the underworld river restricted area, absorbing the life force from the celestial's blood hair. The Undying Codex was divided into skin, muscle, tendons, bones, and blood. Bai Xiaochun had started from the foundation and worked all the way up to the 4th volume. And right now, he was in the powered bones level. After that came heavenly bones, and in the end, the true undying bones. The key to cultivating his undying technique was life force. Only by having access to enough life force could one achieve the meteoric rise that one sought. In the past, he had relied on his eternal parasol to absorb life force from the wildlander chosen. That was what had helped him to break through from the tempered bones level to powered bones. But now, with the life force that the celestial had gone through countless trials and tribulations to cultivate into his blood hair, Bai Xiaochun was making shocking progress. Intense rumbling sounds could be heard, and he shook physically as his bones creaked and cracked. It was as if he were completely changing his skeleton, causing him to rise rapidly through the 4th volume of the Undying Codex. In fact, he immediately broke through to the heavenly bones level. He became like a black hole, absorbing all of the life force from the blood hair, and then using the Undying Codex techniques to send it rushing into his bones, utterly transforming them. Rumble. No one outside could hear any of the shocking sound, but Bai Xiaochun could hear it as clear as day. Furthermore, he could sense his heavenly bones rapidly absorbing the life force that continued to pour into them. His heavenly bones instantly went into the 3rd stratum, then the 4th, 5th, 7th, and 9th. It was skyrocketing. Another breakthrough. He was now in the 1st stratum of the Undying Bones, and yet, had only absorbed a portion of the life force from the celestial's blood hair. Now, that life force continued to propel him through the Undying Bones level. The final level of the Undying Bones required a massive amount of life force, more than all 3 of the previous levels put together. Furthermore, once he reached the peak, it meant that his fleshly body would be at an astonishingly high level. His fleshly body would be comparable to a diva. His skin, muscles, and bones would be at a level that would make them almost impossible to destroy. Later on would come the Undying Blood, which came with dramatic restorative powers. At that point, his fleshly body would be very close to the truly undying level. Then, he would be at the same level as the blood ancestor back in the river-defying sect. At that point, his cultivation of the Undying Codex would be complete. Right now, he relied on the blood hair of the Celestial to advance by leaps and bounds. His Undying Bones advanced from the 1st stratum to the 4th, and then continued. 5th stratum, 6th, 7th. The blood hair was slowly transforming into ash, and Bai Xiaochun was completely wrapped up in his cultivation. As such, he didn't even know how much time was passing. By the time he reached the 7th stratum of the Undying Bones, half a month had gone by. There was simply too much life force within that lock of blood hair, and as it poured into Bai Xiaochun, he continued to advance through the levels of the Undying Codex. In fact, it seemed possible that, by the time he reached the peak of the Undying Bones, there might still be life force left over, which he could then use as fuel for his future undying blood. Meanwhile, word was spreading through the lands about how the Celestial, along with an impostor Bai Xiaochun, had fought with the Hell Emperor. The news spread like wildfire, and was the subject of discussion among soul cultivators, necromancers, and savage tribes alike. It was a monumental event, and anyone who heard about it for the first time would gasp in response. Although not everyone in the Wildlands and the Arch-Emperor dynasty knew who the Celestial was, many did. He was widely understood to be the emperor ruling in the Heavenspan River region, someone similar in status to the Arch-Emperor dynasty, with a cultivation base that surpassed the demigod realm. He was the reason that, years ago, the Arch-Emperor dynasty had relocated to the Wildlands. Despite how many years had passed since then, the two sides of the conflict had continued to fight. The endless sieges of the Great Wall had created seas of blood, as well as constant enmity. Although the conflict hadn't reached the point where no resolution was possible, it was nearly at that point. The common people of the Arch-Emperor dynasty yearned to fight their way back into the Heavenspan River region and re-establish the glory of their dynasty. And now, the emperor of that Heavenspan River region had joined forces with a ghost to fight the Hell Emperor. It was truly a shocking matter. Even more astonishing was how the ghostess who had impersonated Bai Xiaochun ended up being seriously injured and fleeing. The Celestial was also hurt. It was a matter of great excitement to the Wildlanders, and caused their morale to soar. The fact that the 4 sections of the Great Wall had collapsed caused countless people in the Wildlands to be filled with the urge to charge forth in battle. In fact, many suggestions and proposals were made to that effect. But the Grand Heaven Master was a wise person, and knew that a world war like that would be very costly. Besides, upon making his escape, the Celestial had placed temporary defensive measure in the place of the collapsed Great Wall. Those defenses could not be broken through. However, that didn't hold the Grand Heaven Master back from taking advantage of the opportunity to begin preparing for war. It would be a war in which even the common people fought. Furthermore, it gave the Grand Heaven Master a further reason to continue the enforcement of the proclamation of universal grace. That made him more popular than ever among the people. In a rare turn of events, the 4 heavenly kings supported him. The truth was that the coming war would be vastly important, and one of the main things on the minds of the giant Ghost King and other demigods was that they knew very well who the current Hell Emperor was, but weren't sure about who the next one would be. Because of the support offered by the 4 heavenly kings, the entire Wildlands was shaken, and everyone thirsted to do battle. It was at around this time that a third bit of news began to make the rounds. It was hard to say where it started, but the nature of the news was even more shocking than the first 2. Whether it was in Arch-Emperor City, the 4 kingly cities, or in the various clans and tribes, soon, everyone was talking about it. The news pertained to Bai Xiaochun. Supposedly, he had another identity in the Wildlands, and although no one knew the exact details, they were sure that it was a position of incredible power and authority. If that ghostess who fought the exalted Hell Emperor was impersonating Bai Xiaochun, then, where has the real Bai Xiaochun been hiding all these years? Hey, that's right, Bai Xiaochun must have been in hiding somewhere here in the Wildlands. But who exactly is he disguised as? As this news spread, people began to speculate about the matter, and before long, people were saying that Bai Xiaochun was actually the former inspections commissioner of Arch-Emperor City, the earthly necromancer Bai Hao. It was a shocking concept that shook the whole Wildlands. Heavenly Marquis clans, Heavenly Duke clans, and the countless other people who had formed grudges with Bai Xiaochun over the years, especially the direct bloodline successors and the chosen, almost couldn't believe what they were hearing. However, they were also elated. As far as they were concerned, whether Bai Hao really was Bai Xiaochun or not, it gave them the perfect chance to kill him. Even being an earthy necromancer wouldn't keep him safe. Ha ha ha, I knew that Bai Xiaochun was up to no good. He impersonated Bai Hao. How evil-minded and devious. It doesn't matter whether you're really Bai Hao or Bai Xiaochun. I refuse to exist under the same sky as you. I'll never forget the humiliation of that aphrodisiac pill. Kill Bai Hao. The direct bloodline successors were particularly riled up, and immediately began searching high and low for Bai Xiaochun. The marquises such as Zhao Xianglin and Lu Yang were particularly excited, especially Zhao Xianglin. After he heard the news, he laughed so loud that it filled the entire Zhao clan mansion. As for the people who had developed close relationships with Bai Xiaochun over the years, they were simply stunned. That was especially true of many people in Giant Ghost City. The Spirit Advent King's daughter Shu Shan was completely flabbergasted. As for Zhou Yixing, he had long since gone into hiding, his heart filled with bitterness. He took Song Ke with him. When Song Ke heard the speculation that Bai Xiaochun was Bai Hao, he felt completely and utterly thunderstruck. However, many people noticed that neither the Grand Heaven Master, nor the 4 Heavenly Kings, nor the 10 Heavenly Dukes would say a single word about the matter of Bai Xiaochun. Before long, the Heavenly Marquises mysteriously stopped talking about the matter, and they even restricted their clan members from discussing it. Zhao Shanlin appeared to be frightened by something, and unhesitatingly went into secluded meditation. As these two wild situations regarding Bai Xiaochun's identity appeared, a fourth bit of news spread, news that surpassed everything else and shook the wildlands to the core. In fact, it was something that struck every wildlander deep in the soul. The Hell Emperor picked Bai Hao to be his successor. Bai Hao isn't Bai Xiaochun. He's the next Hell Emperor. This news was like an invisible slap to the face to countless individuals in the wildlands who had longed to kill Bai Hao. They felt the world spinning around them as they realized that they would never again be able to give voice to any thoughts about killing Bai Hao. Heavens! He's the next Hell Emperor. This means that no one in the wildlands will ever dare to offend him. Damn it, why does it have to be this way? The Bai clan from Giant Ghost City wanted to kill him, but in the critical moment, the Giant Ghost King protected him. The Chosen of Arch-Emperor City wanted to kill him, but in the critical moment, the Grand Heaven Master saved him. Then he committed the grave offense of killing a Heavenly Marquis, and all of the aristocracy in the entire dynasty teamed up against him. But then, his status as an earthly necromancer saved him. Now, when his identity was brought into question, and everyone wanted to kill him. Fudge. I can't believe he's going to be the next Hell Emperor. Everyone who had grudges with Bai Xiaochun harbored similar thoughts upon hearing the news. Whether it was Zhou Hong, Little Wolf God, Zhao Shanlin, or others, they were struck mute with fear, and could do little more than wail inwardly in grief. Furthermore, they couldn't stop from wondering what would happen now that someone like him, someone who had caused trouble wherever he went, now had such a position of authority. Bai Xiaochun had rocked the wildlands and established a legend. In fact, many people now viewed Bai Xiaochun as so fantastic, that he was like a god. Of course, Zhou Yixing was beyond delighted. Song Ke breathed a sigh of relief, and was very glad that everyone had been wrong in their speculations. Clearly, it had been the right decision after all to follow Bai Hao. He was going to be the next Hell Emperor. HMPH, Song Ke said arrogantly in his heart. How could Bai Xiaochun possibly be Bai Hao? He doesn't even qualify to polish his shoes. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.